Greetings from London, Ontario, Canada. Today, Roberto Limongi and I want to talk about modeling epistemic writing. Let's start disclosing that we have no conflict of interest to report. Next, two main goals has been driven in this presentation. First, we need to discuss specific findings reported by us in the Journal of Writing Research 2019. The link is provided at the bottom of the snapshot. Second, because we are moving from the phenomenological perspective tested in the referred paper to a new direction, we expect to understand the mechanism of how writing effectively affects learning in the brain. This is a project in progress in the neuroimaging in mental illness group at Robert Research Institute. Roberto will cover this point later. Turning to our previous work, we plan briefly to talk about four starting points. Writing as a multidimensional, high-level skill, the long-standing concept of epistemic writing, writing to learn versus learning to write, and of course, the hypothesis tested. Learning is better engaged during writing than oral productions. Regarding academic context, our understanding about writing as a multidimensional, high-level skill display a complex research agenda, at least in one of these four features: purposes, gadgets, and learning activity, techniques, and scenarios. Today, it is almost impossible not to think about studying any of these features with a codependent pattern. For example, learning plus reading comprehension. In addition, the focus on how writing affect learning has shown variation across observational approaches, moving from the classic thinking aloud protocol to key logging for studying writing processes, or using fMRI as a gold standard in neurocognitive science study. The long-standing concept of epistemic writing has pointed almost 50 years ago a hybrid way to think about writing, not only because it uses language system for communicative purpose, but also writing is associated with cognition because many other covariables from the cognitive system, for example, orthographic recognition, show up during writing activities. Please see the highlighted link on the top and the bottom of the globe map image. A pioneer approach was proposed by Janet Amy in 1977. This is a seminal work called Writing as a Mode of Learning. Also, Perry Klein reopened 20 years ago the inquiry of cognitive processes over famous writing English composition model. And many other initiatives around the world paved the way to consider writing as an epistemic tool, even regarding a specific outcome in languages or demographic data. But here we are, still discussing about the phenomenological perspective on writing and learning outside the learner. In the best scenario, we know about, for example, variation in lexical pattern or grammatical construction by genre, or assessing key cognitive processes likely engaged by learning activity. See for detail, Arnold et al. 2017. Now, along with the tradition of studying writing in academic context, two trends led to empirical design. We recognize in both trends, writing to learn and learning to write, a foundation in writing across the curriculum, writing into discipline. Therefore, we must expect in the writing research two scopes involved. On the one hand, we have writing will help a student to acquire disciplinary knowledge. On the other hand, writing will help to socialize the disciplinary knowledge via discipline-specific genre. But in the present, a simple search on web design can tell us a different story. First, for sure, both trends have ruled the English-speaking context of study writing in academic context. Looking at the yellow square, we have the same H index, which refers to as total publication, whereas the average citation item, please see the red square reports are quite different in the last 20 years. Second, looking at the graph on the left, it appears to be that the ascending trajectory of the line speak for more work done in writing to learn. Moving on, how do we know if writing effectively affects learning for better? We are grateful to share the first paper that tested the hypothesis of how writing improves learning considering two behavioral cognitive measures, reaction time and accuracy. Please see the table and the pine line of experimental design. In addition, we know the low reaction time to retrieve words such as disciplinary concept is the most basic sign of long-term memory consolidation regarding the classic lexical access task for modeling epistemic writing. But what is next? Roberto will explain a main brain mechanism of this effect. Roberto.
Thank you. Before moving forward to the neurocognitive model or the idea of neurocognitive model we have of the effect of writing on learning, I'm going to review briefly the experimental design we have been implementing in our program. It is very basic and intuitive. First, subjects read a text and they produce either orally or in written form a summary of the text. This first part of the test is complemented by a long-term memory recognition task. The long-term memory recognition task comprises words presented one at a time on a computer screen, and the subject has to decide whether or not the word appeared in the text that they read before producing the summary. What we found with this basic experimental design that can be implemented in a writing center, for example, in a computer lab, or even in the classroom using iPads. What we have found here is that the reaction time, the time the subject takes to recognize whether or not the word appeared in the text, is lower when they produce a written summary than when they produce a spoken summary, in spite of the fact that the accuracy of the performance is pretty much the same in both conditions. This is a basic index that suggests the effect of writing on the long-term memory. And this is the basic index we have been using for approximately 5-6 years to investigate the neurocognitive mechanisms. Now, to actually show how this occurs in the mind or in the brain, we have to take two different perspectives. One is cognitive and the other is neural. From the cognitive perspective or the mind perspective, we fit a computational model to the behavioral data, to the accuracy and the reaction time data. This computational model is basic in decision-making, in the decision-making literature. It's called the drift diffusion model. It's just a simple case of a general class or category of models of decision-making called the evidence accumulation model. The model is simple and comprises 7 parameters. I'm not going to go into the detail of this parameter, but only one. The non-decision process, the process that the subject takes to encode the information while reading the word that is presented to as a test word. The encoding process seems to be the most important component that accounts for the differences between the two modalities. And this component could be implemented in the brain by a specific region, which is the hippocampus. The hippocampus seems to be the specialized region in the brain that takes over all the encoding processes during the first stages of learning, during the first stages of the long-term memory consolidation. Afterwards, the cortex in the brain takes over the process, and then it's when it comes the long-term memory consolidation. This is the model, the neural part of the model that we are trying to demonstrate now with our design. But this design has some challenges. One is how we can implement the same experimental design inside a machine in which we can measure the brain activity. This is challenging, and we decided to split the task into parts. The first part, the part where the subject reads the text and produces the written or spoken summary, is performed outside the scanner. Inside the scanner, the subject performs the long-term memory recognition task. While performing this task, we collect data from their brain, and then we model this data using computational models. With this procedure, we have two sets of parameters, cognitive and neural. With these two sets of parameters, we can precisely identify some specific variability within specific populations. In this case, we are trying to implement this model and to be successful at it with a specific population, which is a neuropsychiatric population here at Roberts. But closer to the writing research community is the implication that this model could have in the classroom, which is the natural environment in which writing to learn occurs. In the classroom, we have variability among students. However, this variability not necessarily is captured by the gadgets that the professors uses when they try to grade their productions. For example, two different students can have the same grade in a written production. However, when we measured these students in a laboratory or a writing center, for example, or more concretely in the lab, we can find differences in the computational parameters that account for their cognitive performance or their brain activity. This suggests that even though in the classroom we can observe the same performance in two different students, in the laboratory or writing center, we can observe different performances. This accounts for the variability that cannot be observed directly phenomenologically in the classroom. To summarize, we first try to differentiate two different trends in the writing research. One is writing to learn, and the other is learning to write. We establish an association between long-term memory consolidation and learning. And in long-term memory consolidation, the behavioral index that suggests that something has happened in the mind of the subject. I mean, when the subject has learned after either speaking a summary or writing a summary, is the reaction time. In the case of writing, the reaction time is shorter than in the case of speaking. And this allows us to model from the cognitive perspective these behavioral variables using computational models. Simultaneously, we can model the same performance using fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, and we have two different sets of parameters. With these parameters, we can explain variability not only in the classroom, but also in neuropsychiatric population, which are our current target. We thank our group for all support we are receiving in this project, the Neuroimaging and Mental Illnesses group here at Roberts Research Institute, and we welcome all your questions you can have to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.